there now for the last few days. Began on Sunday when the Chiefs took on the Denver Broncos, got absolutely dominated in that game, or I should probably say the backups got dominated in this game 38-0. It meant a lot for the Broncos to win that football game. For the Chiefs, it meant absolutely nothing. And for those out there complaining about the Chiefs nose-diving that game, intentionally tanking so that the Bengals couldn't make the postseason, I don't know why that would matter at all to Kansas City when you're worrying about the number 7 seed in the AFC playoff picture. But now we know what the AFC looks like. We know what the NFC looks like. We know the time slots for all of these games. And we certainly have the work cut out for us tonight in talking about this playoff picture. Also coming up in about 15 to 20 minutes or so, we'll be talking with the lead analyst over at Arrowhead Pride, Ron Kopp. We'll get his thoughts on that game against Denver. Not a lot of thoughts, because what can you really take away from a 38-0 beatdown that we saw at Mile High? We'll more so be looking ahead to the postseason, who the Chiefs may get in the divisional round. They, of course, have the bye this week, so you can just kick your feet up, have a beer, and watch the wild card weekend. There's lots of fun games on Saturday, even better games, in my opinion, on Sunday. And then to wrap up wild card weekend, you have one more game on Monday. So we'll give you all those time slots. We'll give you all the matchups in those games. Should be a lot of fun. And you'll just probably know by Sunday afternoon who the Chiefs' opponent will be, because on Saturday afternoon we'll get the Chargers-Texans game. We'll have the Bills and Broncos on Sunday afternoon. That's the first game, I believe, on Sunday. And then the Steelers and Ravens as well will be played before then. So by Sunday, late afternoonish, you will likely know, actually not likely, you will know who the opponent is for Kansas City coming to Arrowhead Stadium for the AFC divisional round. But first things first here, Pete, is there anything, and I mean a minuscule thing here, you can take away from what you saw in Denver in the 38-0 loss? There were all backups out there, but I've asked this to a few different people.
Yeah.
Does that concern you about depth? Or were these guys out there? I mean, there were some guys that got a considerable amount of snaps in a normal week, Leo Chenal being one of them. I think we saw Brian Cook, Jamari Conner, Najee Johnson out there. But there were a lot of guys who, quite honestly, I don't think I had seen take a single snap, it feels like, all season long. So is there anything you can take away from a game like that?
Well, you need your starters, and I think we already knew that prior to the game. And I think if you look at the game as a whole, there were certain players that participated that could contribute. No one really in a significant impact necessarily. I mean, I think you can make the case of DJ Humphries, but did we learn that he's a stone-cold lock to be the starting left tackle? No, I think it just based on his performance. His performance wasn't bad, but it wasn't great. And you wonder, okay, how much of that was his injury and still working his way back? And in that fashion, how much was it a little bit of rust from not playing for a few weeks because of the hamstring? Was it, well, look who he's next to? I mean, any offensive lineman that you talk to will say it's a product of the 5, and he was with the backup offensive line for most of the game. And so I wonder if that's still a question. I think it's one of those things we're going to have to wait and see. There were other possible contributors. I thought Nico Remigio looked pretty good for all the training camp hype that he gets, and this is a deep wide receiver room, so you're only going to get certain opportunities to see him. I thought Peyton Hendershot, your depth tight end, looked okay. Felix, I thought, had his moments. Same thing with Josh Uche. Again, these are potential rotational type contributors that you learn something about. On the negative side, I think it raised questions about Harrison Butker and just not as automatic. Not to say that he's suddenly a bad kicker, but you just start to wonder, okay, can we trust him? And with a team that plays mostly single-score games, I think you learn something negatively about the depth when it comes to Najee Johnson, right? Is Keith Taylor or Chris Roland Wallace, or is it a dip into the practice squad and you get Steve Nelson in the mix? Is it a little bit more of urgency of like, well, if Jalen Watson's 85%, maybe you just go with him, especially if he's willing to do that. And so certain things you learned, but I think mostly it was a throwaway game. And I'm not maybe as overly concerned as everybody else, because I think the one thing we're forgetting here is the opposition. Like, I think Denver's pretty good.
Yeah.
I know it stinks to say that because they've been down for so many years, but this is a team that won 10 games, including the one they won on Sunday to clinch the playoff spot. I think they got a good quarterback for the first time in years and years and years since Peyton Manning. I think you can make the case. Got good wide receivers, pretty good offensive line, certainly a fantastic defensive front. And now you're going up against backups in what the Chiefs, for the most part, treated as like a third preseason game.
Yeah.
So the result was the result. You're going to get that with any team in the league, a playoff team versus backups. And I think you just move on. The Chiefs decided to prioritize rest, and that was the result that we saw in the score.
I think we saw some very vanilla play calling, and also I believe in the first half, Spags only blitzed like twice,
right?
With what he had
You
out
say
there.
Typical for him too, yeah.
Do we feel like that was the game plan no matter what going into the game, or do you feel like that game plan kind of came into shape once Denver showcased in the first 10 minutes? You know, it's a 2-score game, and it wasn't going to be very close for that long.
Yeah, well, why game plan for it when you could see this team in a week?
Yeah.
You don't want to show them any kind of look. It's going to be vanilla on both sides of the ball. When it comes to that, I think you just hope that it was more competitive than it was. I mean, it wasn't competitive from the second the game began till it ended. And I think it does raise some like vibe concerns, right? Like, you talk about Detroit and the way that they're handling it. And I think you can say to yourself, like, okay, right, you can make a case that maybe the vibes are slightly better when you play the guys. Now, Detroit also had to play that Week 18 game for the number 1 seed. And when you play your players, you may get injuries. And they had an injury in the defensive back room. And now, I think there are huge question marks about Detroit and how good their defense could be throughout the postseason. Now, they had to play that game. I'm more talking about the week before. But injuries can happen. And so you really got to sacrifice slightly better vibes heading into the playoffs for losing some of your potential starters. I mean, you can debate that all you want. I tend to favor the Chiefs side. I don't think you risk that. I like what the Chiefs did. And, like, for me, it's look no further than Travis Kelce last year. When he rests, he doesn't play in that Week 18 game. He could have had another year of that 1,000-yard streak, and he said, I'm just going to back off. And he was fantastic in the postseason with minimum 71 yards per game. He had 3 touchdowns by the end of it. I mean, I think you take that 10 times out of 10, not to say that that's guaranteed, but when you have that prospect, it's just hard not to lean into that.
Let's go through a couple list of players of what we saw in this game. DJ Humphries gets to start at left tackle. Najee Johnson as well kind of got some run as the number 1, number 2 cornerback in this game. And also I do want to circle back to Harrison Butker and his health status going into the postseason. But with DJ Humphries, do you feel like he did enough where you roll the dice going into that divisional round game and say, hey, let's go back to you at left tackle now that you're healthy, you have played in the game, you have another one under your belt, and Joe Thuney's going to go back to where he truly thrives at left guard? Or do you say, we saw enough where we know if an injury does happen, you will be the guy going to left tackle and not Wanya Morris?
It feels like the latter, and I go back and forth on this because Andy Reid was open with the media, right? He essentially was saying we would ideally like to have DJ Humphries at left tackle so that Joe Thuney could play his native position. The problem that you run into the playoffs, and I think especially this tournament, is 1 through 7 is legit teams. So are you really in a position, even again in your first game, which is going to be the lowest seed that comes out of the wild card weekend, can you really even afford to put Humphries out there for a series? And if it's bad, then you make I don't think you can even afford to risk one single series being bad. And so if there's any question, I tend to think you would rather go with Thuney at left tackle, just because when you just think about, okay, some of these games come down to a kick. I know we're going to talk about Harrison Butker in a second, and you got to put the maximum amount of points on the board. There's no more room. There's no more like, let's see how he does. And I think the Chiefs know that. And the fact that Thuney went out there during that 3-game and 11-day stretch, and I thought the Chiefs' offense looked as good as it had all year, probably the best it had all year. And I wonder going away from that if that's the right move. We'll see. You wish you came out of the game and said DJ Humphries was fantastic. That this is a no-brainer. We didn't get that. So now you just continue to wonder what they will do. And there's a lot of time between now and when the Chiefs play. I mean, the first possible game is next Saturday. So, I mean, you could bet that this is going to be the number one topic. And I do wonder, I believe we're going to get some kind of media availability on Friday. I do wonder if Andy Reid even reveals his cards in that sense. This just might be one of these things like we saw during the regular season that may be a mystery up until the time they take the field for the divisional round.
Now, I don't want to, make excuses for the offense because they got shut out, right? It was not a good performance, and the offensive line clearly was not good enough. But I jump over to the defensive side of the ball here, and Bo Nix could do no wrong. I mean, he started the game not just nearly perfect, he was perfect in the first half of this game. And a lot of that, I think, came down to the secondary and the secondary's play. Denver got a lot of open receivers in this one. Bo Nix really didn't have to make any extra effort throws. They were all right there. And one guy I think they got picked on once again a lot was Najee Johnson. Yeah. And when you've got the rumblings of Jalen Watson, his practice window being opened, Josh Williams has played well. Of course, you have Trent McDuffie. Now, Chamari Connor a little bit uncertain because of the injury he suffered in that game. Where are you at with putting Najee Johnson out there on the field for a meaningful do-or-die postseason game?
I just don't think he can do it anymore. I really don't. And I hate to say that because he's a great person to talk to. And, like, when I say – I want to be clear here. Like, when I say you can't put him out for the postseason, I don't think his career is suddenly over.
Yeah.
When you see players with ACL injuries – a lot of times, I mean, it almost like clockwork. Charles Omenihu seems to be an outlier, which is great. But a lot of times it takes them a full calendar year to really look like the player they were before. And if you remember, ahead of what would have been last season, he was pushing to be the starter. And he looked good during training camp. And the Chiefs were excited about him. He suffers that injury as the long road back. He had some injuries in the preseason and training camp this year. And just never got back to that glimpse of a potential starter that you saw 2 training camps ago. And you just can't risk it at this point. I think this development where Jalen Watson could suddenly be available is a huge break for Kansas City. Because talking to people in the building throughout the year, they didn't think that Watson was coming back. And for him to be out there on the field, I know that he puts out these Instagram and Twitter videos of him running, and he looks pretty good. I wish we could see a full practice. We don't get full practices once training camp is over, but I like the prospect of him coming back, and it seems to be necessary just because of the uncertainty surrounding Watson throughout the year. I do want to caution people. I don't know if he'll be ready for the divisional round. It seems like the way that you've done the math, you do the math backwards, 10 weeks, 11 weeks from the injury. It seems like he'd be more fresh, so to speak, ready to go by like an AFC title game. But who knows? Like I said, if it's the difference between, well, this week he's going to be 90% and maybe for the AFC title game will be 100%, then you start to do that inner debate with yourself if he's willing to play. Is a 90% Watson your best option? And I got to think after watching this last game, and granted, Trent McDuffie didn't play, and so you have Najee Johnson against the top target trying to make $500,000 by getting a certain amount of yards. I mean, all that goes into it, but at the same token, like it's the playoffs. Same thing I was saying with Humphries. You just cannot risk one series defensively of let's see with Johnson. And so maybe it isn't necessarily Jalen Watson. Maybe it is a Joshua Williams or, like I said, a Chris Roland Wallace or a Keith Taylor that gets elevated. But I think it's at a point where you can't trust that player. And again, not to say that you don't get to training camp next year and he looks a lot like he did 2 training camps ago when he was building toward that. I just think right now they can't do it. You just can't do it. Yeah.
It's been a little bit of a struggle since Harrison Butker was activated off the IR.
Yeah.
Came back, in plenty of time before the regular season concluded. But do you have this growing sense now that you've seen the struggles that maybe they rushed him back when they didn't need to? I mean, they had been getting good production from guys like a Spencer Schrader and a Matthew Wright,
yep.
right? They're going in there and didn't have any screw-ups. I mean, they just made the layups they needed to make. They did have one miss, I believe, but it was toward the end of the half, and it was 50-plus yards. Like, there was no, I guess, desperate need to go back to Butker, yet they decide to. And I'm starting to question if he was really even that close to 100%, because this is not the same Harrison Butker we've seen where he's so automatic from 50-plus, because the miss he had on Sunday against Denver, I mean, we just don't see that often. Even though it's 51 yards, that thing was never close.
Yeah, I agree. And this is a player that was automatic. I just have a lot of thoughts about it. Like, did they rush him back from injury? Who knows? It looks that way in certain circumstances. Was that the right decision at the time? I mean, Matthew Wright had to boink a field goal in to win the game. So you can understand why the Chiefs were like, let's get back to Harrison Butker in that fashion. I don't know. The team seems to maintain that the way that he sort of like lands on that foot awkwardly is by design. And I'm not a kicking expert. I've never played kicker in any level of football in my entire life, but that I don't know about that. Like, that does not seem
doesn't seem very comfortable.
That doesn't seem like that should be the answer to whatever he's going through, and it is a worry. I don't know if it's a dire worry, because like I'll go back to the percentage thing with Watson. Like, is an 85-90% Butker better than the alternative? Probably. It just may be something the Chiefs have to live with, and it might be one of these things during the postseason where you see them go for it on, like, let's say a 4th and 3 at the 33. And normally this would be a comfortable position where Andy Reid is like, all right, 50-yarder, Butker's automatic, let's get the points. This may be an instance where the better option, just because of the little bit of that uncertainty, is leave the offense on the field. Let's keep it in the hands of Patrick Mahomes, and let's see if the offense can pick this up rather than going to the field goal. You wish that you had the automatic, no doubt, Butker going into the playoffs. I just don't think right now that's a reality, no.
Last thing I want to get to before we get to Ron Kopp here in a few minutes. Matt Nagy and Mike Borgonzi, they interview with the New York Jets. The Jets right now are interviewing a lot of different candidates.
Yeah.
But how do you see that shaking out? Do you feel like Nagy is going to get an offer from the Jets to be their next head coach, or do you feel like he's going to lose out to maybe a different guy out there, maybe a Ben Johnson, the OC of the Detroit Lions, and maybe more importantly, Mike Borgonzi, another front office member that has gotten a lot of high praise, and how could he not after all the other guys that have gotten jobs ahead of him that were in the front office before he took on that role?
Yeah, it sounds like Borgonzi will fly there. It sounds like Nagy's interview will be virtual. If I'm these guys, man, I would be interviewing them as much as they're interviewing me. I don't know if I would want to work for Ambassador Johnson, as many GMs of the past can attest. Sometimes you only get one shot at this, and I think Borgonzi's in line for plenty of interviews as we go here, as the years go on. That being said, if I'm the Jets, I would be very attracted to the idea of bringing a GM head coach tandem to my team to work in lockstep like they do in Kansas City with Andy Reid and Brett Veach, and to turn this whole thing around. I think Matt Nagy gets a bad rap. I tweeted out this story yesterday when it broke. I gave some analysis on Arrowhead Pride, and I'm getting mentions like, oh, fantastic, have them take Nagy. Why is there this thing in Kansas City when the offense is purring and they look fantastic? Is Andy Reid looked at as a god? Oh my God, Andy Reid is just the best. The play design, the timing, this is when the offense struggles, it's fire Bieniemy. I want him out of town. Get rid of Peterson. We got to get rid of Matt Nagy. There's such a weird phenomenon when it comes to the success and lack of success of the offense. I think Matt Nagy learned a lot from his first time in Chicago. I think he will do really a lot better. I feel the same way about Steve Spagnuolo in St. Louis. I think these guys in their second go-round are going to be way better head coaches. If I'm the Jets, I would take both or none. I think you really want to bring, when you're starting from fresh like the Chiefs did in 2013, at the time, Andy Reid and John Dorsey had a tremendous amount of respect for each other. That ended up changing, which is why they made the move, over the years. But at the same time, like, they reestablished, okay, we're not going to be a joke anymore. We're going to load this roster up with talent. I really like for teams to go and get these guys that can work together. And so for me, if I'm the Jets, I'm attracted to bringing these two guys in. I don't trust the Jets ownership to make a good decision like that. I think it's going to be like you're saying, like, let's bring in the hottest name, or let's bring in Rex Ryan. I don't trust the New York Jets, and I don't think they'll be smart enough to maybe bring in this tandem. And if there's a team out there that does, I would be very curious to see how they do, and I would think that they would be bringing in guys that could really turn around said organization.
And it's probably a pretty big question at this point when it comes to the Jets. Will Aaron Rodgers be the quarterback for them next year?
No, the answer is no to that.
No. Okay, so it'll be a full blow-it-up scenario
I do
once
not
again.
anticipate that. Yeah,
Oof.
I think Rodgers will be elsewhere, yeah.
Well, it will be something to follow, not only with their head coach search, their GM search, but the quarterback search, maybe for the New York Jets. Let's take our first break of the show. When we come back, we'll talk with lead analyst of Arrowhead Pride, Ron Kopp, right here on Sports Radio 810 WHB. Back here on Arrowhead Pride Radio on Sports Radio 810 WHB. I am your host, Jack Johnson. Pete Sweeney sitting across from me. Caden Spruill is producing it. Kyle Collier back there as well. And we want to remind you that Arrowhead Pride Radio is brought to you by Heartland Financial and Mortgage. Check them out at hfm.com. Well, Ron, it was quite an ugly performance that we saw on Sunday, but you had to keep in mind, a bunch of backups playing, not just second stringers. There were a lot of third stringers out there. But I asked Pete this question, so I'll ask you the same one. Is there really anything you can take away from a game like that, or was the game plan so vanilla, there was never really effort put in, And at the end of the day, that should have been the result for a team fighting for the postseason.
I think you can definitely say that on the offensive side of things. I think just having, your offensive line out, your backup quarterback in, so many weapons not playing, it's fine to say that on offense. But I do think you can point to some things on defense that, could be foreshadowing a little bit, especially when you already, talk about the big pass plays this team has allowed, throughout the second half of the season. Obviously you saw a little bit of that in Denver, with guys that are going to be playing in the playoffs, potentially, right? You talk about cornerbacks, Joshua Williams, Najee Johnson, safety Chamari Connor, they all gave up, some sort of play, throughout the day. And that's where cornerback Jalen Watson's return from injury is so important, right? We saw him get that practice window opened up right before that Week 18 game. So huge to keep an eye on him, because I do think the one little weakness you're seeing with the Chiefs defense that's been prevalent throughout the year is giving up big explosive plays down the field, just explosive, pass plays in general. And you saw that in Denver a little bit too. And again, it wasn't just with guys that aren't going to see the field in the postseason. That's what guys are going to be counting on. But that's where Jalen Watson's injury is huge, because if he's back, it can kind of relieve some pressure off of the guys like Najee Johnson and Joshua Williams.
Ron, I got to ask you about something, and I think it's sort of amusing. Over the weekend, I was watching you cover this game for us. You do a great write-up for us doing the gamer at Arrowhead Pride, but you also spent time on X during the game, and you said that 13 might not be on the team by the first playoff game. So you don't want to see Najee Johnson at all. I know that was probably exaggerated, but has he truly become a non-option when it comes to legitimate snaps for you in the playoffs?
Well, when you do consider Watson being back in the lineup, that may push Najee at least off the defensive lineup, right? The thing with Najee that gets underrated for sure is the special teams ability. It's what made him a player originally in the first place. So, yes, that probably was a little bit of an exaggeration. But when you talk about pushing him out of the defensive lineup, I think that's absolutely possible with Watson back in. You have Watson and McDuffie really as your two primary guys. And then obviously that gives you the ability to put McDuffie back in the slot, have Joshua Williams come in as that third cornerback when you need to. And then you can relieve Chamari Connor of some of that stress where he's playing in that slot. I think that's been a really key point of opponents to attack of the Chiefs defense is just that slot position. Connor is a really good, quality safety in my opinion. He's progressing as a safety, but they're putting him in a lot of unideal situations for what he is as a player, putting him in those man-on-man, one-on-one slot situations with guys that are just, going to be route runners, that are going to be able to get some separation on him. Yeah. If you can relieve that, put McDuffie back in the slot more because you have Watson on the outside. Williams, I should give him a little more credit. I think he's been playing better than lumping at him with Najee Johnson. But all that to say, yeah, I think Watson coming back is huge in multiple ways. It really strengthens the back end for the defense and really relieves some of the weak links in the defense.
Ron, I want to ask you one more question about the defense, and then I'll let Jack attack you about the offense. But I thought, from my eye, and you're our film wing of Arrowhead Pride, but from my eye, I thought Felix had a nice day, and I thought Josh Uche, who we really haven't seen since he became a part of the team, also looked okay. Did you agree on that, and could you see them potentially having expanded roles in the postseason?
Yeah, I think Felix is definitely. You're seeing him. I think he's just gotten physically bigger and stronger. Like I think we can see that when you just watch him play. He definitely looks like he's a little more filled out, and you're seeing that in his play. I mean, this past week I think you're seeing that a little bit. But I go back to that sack in Pittsburgh. I think that was a great move that he had on that one play. It was late in the fourth quarter. And that's what's going to come in the playoffs when you're talking about a guy who's a rotational pass rusher, not going to be seeing a ton of snaps. When you're going to be playing maybe, second half when the offensive lineman's a little tired and you got fresher legs, if you can just win those one-on-ones just one time, that's all you can ask for a reserve pass rusher. The thing with Uche, though, that is interesting, and it kind of reveals maybe why you're not seeing him on the field as much. He's playing that off-ball linebacker position primarily. He is a Sam linebacker. He's kind of what Leo Chenal plays, where, yeah, he is going to come up on the line of scrimmage, when the defense kind of calls for it. But, he isn't an edge defender, a defensive end technically in their depth chart, in their lineup. You saw that where he was playing kind of off the ball and playing more traditional linebacker stuff. I think that's what's kind of maybe the weird part about him in the Spags defense, why we're not seeing him as much, is just he's not necessarily a straight fit. Someone like Leo Chenal, they're making things happen for him because he's such a talented player. They want to use his different skill sets. Uche, when you throw him in the middle of the year, maybe you just don't find the same ways to kind of utilize him in unique ways, that hybrid linebacker / edge defender type. So I think it would take, knock on wood, like something happened to Leo for Uche to really, get going. I think you're seeing the rise of Omenihu and Felix himself maybe give them relief on having to find some way to get edge rush on the defense.
Where are you at when it comes to this offensive line? Of course, I think going into this divisional round matchup, it'll be one of the talking points because we've seen the running back room get a little bit healthier, a little bit more productive. The receiver room has certainly added more production now with Hollywood Brown back and Xavier Worthy coming on strong. But still, that left side of the offensive line, it's going to be a question mark in that first postseason game. Who do you think they're going to run out there, and what's the confidence level going to be going up against whatever opponent they may face?
I think the one thing that is key about the left tackle position that I think we have learned in Mahomes' career is that it just takes having someone that he is comfortable with or that he knows at the left tackle spot. And if you look at those two games where Tooney steps in and starts at left tackle, I mean, you're looking at two of the most confidently played, the most comfortable Mahomes has looked all season. And that is all I need to see for me to say that Tooney should be the one right into the playoffs at left tackle. It has nothing to do with necessarily how Humphries is performing. I think you just have to look at, the comfort level Mahomes plays with from the pocket, with someone that he trusts. And Tooney is someone that just breeds trust. I mean, he's someone that's been doing it for so long. He's so reliable. He's dirt tough. I mean, he's going to grit through, stuff and play every snap. So that's where I just feel like Mahomes you can kind of tell the offense was in a different rhythm. I think that does have to do with Hollywood Brown as well, his return, kind of maybe opening up things for the offense, giving the offense more speed, more space. But all that to say is if you want Mahomes feeling good in the playoffs, which is the ultimate factor, I think, you just got to have Tooney on that left side and then Humphries as a very capable emergency option.
Ron, where are you at on the running back position? I know we didn't see them necessarily in this game, but I know that there's been some debate. Should Kareem Hunt be the one? Should Isaiah Pacheco be the one? I know that the Chiefs will probably run it by a committee anyway. But it seems to me like in the latter stretch of the season, and Kareem was slightly more reliable. Where do you land on that?
Yeah, I would probably tend to agree that I'd like to see Kareem maybe get the bulk of the carries and Pacheco be more of a change of pace back. When you kind of break it down, it is kind of funny. Pacheco has always had the reputation of a power back, a brute, kind of back, but he's an explosive back. If you give him a lane, he's the one that's going to burst for 20, 25, 30 yards, whereas Kareem, he has really shown this year that his vision, built over time, being a vet, that stuff does build. And it's something that he squeezes the most out of these, those zone run plays that aren't necessarily supposed to turn into, huge runs. They're supposed to kind of just keep the sticks moving, keep the offense ahead of the sticks. Kareem is the one that's getting 6-7 yards on those plays where maybe they'd only be 3 or 4 yards from another back. So that's where I think Kareem should probably be the primary back when this offense is, moving up and down the field. But Pacheco still has that explosive ability, and he's just, someone that they can kind of split those possessions, right, where maybe Kareem gets a possession, Pacheco gets a possession. As long as you're keeping somebody back there fresh, I think it's a really nice thing to have. I don't think this offense has always had that ability in the postseason to have someone fresh at all times. It feels like, a lot of times they kind of gotten down to one back as we've gotten down to this. So it's definitely a nice luxury. But I do think Pacheco or Kareem Hunt is the guy that should maybe get closer to the 15-20 carry mark in a game.
Last one for me, Ron. Really appreciate your time. We're talking with Ron Kopp, lead analyst over at Arrowhead Pride. We saw what Denver was able to do against the backups, and we've seen how Denver has fared this season with a rookie quarterback in Bo Nix. It appears Sean Payton has them headed in the right direction. But now their biggest test of the year. As the 7 seed, they're going to go on the road to take on the Buffalo Bills and an MVP favorite in Josh Allen in Orchard Park. What's the percentage you give Denver of knocking off Buffalo in that spot and then eventually coming to Kansas City to take on the Chiefs at Arrowhead?
Well, I'll put it like this. The Vegas spread is 8.5, and I think you can feel comfortable giving Denver those points or having Denver cover that amount of points. I should be a closer game. The Denver defense is stout, and, they have the kind of the guys up front to really get after Josh without necessarily needing the extra rushers, being able to stay back in coverage and really give him some trouble maybe finding some open throws down the field. I think they're going to be able to muck up that game. make it a closer game than maybe Buffalo wants. But man, I don't know. Rookie quarterback on the road, his first postseason game. Bo Nix is the type. He plays with a lot of emotion, a lot of passion, and I think that goes both ways sometimes. So I think Buffalo escapes with this one, but I can see Denver giving them a really tight game at the end, and really giving the Chiefs fans a little sweat, bringing Denver back here. Not that anyone would be sweating too hard about that, but seeing Denver back would be, third time, that'd be kind of fun.
Ron, let's close here. You know the choices. We've been looking at it all week. You just knocked out the Broncos, but who do you want the Chiefs to see, and who do you think they will see next week?
Well, I will say I think the Chargers are primed to be the team coming into Arrowhead.
Yeah.
I just feel like Houston is hitting the end of the road, and the Chargers feel like they're kind of hitting their stride a little bit. They had some injuries middle of the season. They're kind of getting healthier, and man, that quarterback-coach combination, it's hard to bet against them right now. So I do think it's going to be the Chargers. The nice thing about that Pittsburgh-Baltimore matchup is having that division game. You never know what's going to happen. Pittsburgh has had Baltimore's number a few times over the last few years.
I agree.
And that could be a really interesting matchup. And obviously I think Chiefs fans would love to see Pittsburgh again, if they were able to squeeze that one out. But, no, I do have confidence the Bills and the Ravens are going to set up for that big matchup in the divisional round, and then it'll be Chiefs-Chargers.
Well, Ron, appreciate your time as always, and we'll talk to you next week. Enjoy the bye week.
Yes, sir. Appreciate y'all. There
he goes. That's our guy, Ron Codd, lead analyst over at Arrowhead Pride. Let's end this segment with those lasting thoughts from Ron. The Steelers and Ravens. I mean, this is a Steelers team that's lost 4 in a row.
Yep.
They are clearly playing their worst football of the season. George Pickens had 1 catch for no yards, 4 or 5 drops in that game against Cincinnati. Wanted to fight a fan in the stands. Mm-hmm. That's their number 1 wide receiver. But as you brought up, Pittsburgh has had Baltimore's number in the past. This one will be in Baltimore. Feels like the Ravens are playing some of their best football. I'll just ask you point blank, what's the percentage chance that Pittsburgh does just turn it around for this game and pull off maybe a bigger upset, in my opinion, than what Denver over Buffalo would be?
Well, when I say this, it should be in your mind, too, if, the Chargers come to Kansas City. Once a team is playing the division team for the 3rd time, it raises the percentage of the upset significantly, in my opinion, because these teams, for example, and I imagine other teams around the league, especially these old school guys like a Jim Harbaugh follow suit, like a Mike Tomlin, they work on the division teams because you play them twice. They have division days and OTAs, and so you just never know. And look, Baltimore is way better than Pittsburgh. I anticipate they win the game, but I'll go as high as 30, 35%, which is high. I mean, that's 1 in 3 games that Pittsburgh finds a way to muck it up and win. And I think the wild card weekend this year, to me, feels more like the divisional round than previous years. And to me, I always call the divisional round the best week of the NFL season because you've gotten rid of the riffraff and now you have the teams. And I feel that way about the wild card weekend. I wouldn't be completely stunned if we saw any team emerge. I don't feel great about Houston, and they're hosting. Other than that, I mean, you look across the board, you wouldn't be completely shocked if any team won. And so I'm really looking forward to this weekend. And part of that, of course, Jack, is I don't have to work. I don't have to lift a finger. So that's the best part, really.
It is the bye weekend. I think what's so interesting about those matchups in Buffalo and Baltimore is maybe it's the recency bias of seeing what Denver just did. And even though they lost 2 previous games before that, it's like that connection with Sean Payton and Bo Nix and that pass rush. Like if Buffalo lost that game, I don't know if I'd be as surprised if I saw Pittsburgh with the way they've been playing and the way Baltimore's been playing, pulling off that upset. I don't know. It feels weird about it.
Yeah, what's strange about this is I don't expect Denver, and I don't necessarily expect Pittsburgh to win. I actually do expect the Chargers to win, like Ron was sort of alluding to. Mm-hmm. It's not an insane scenario to think the Chiefs might have to play the Broncos and then the Chargers to go to the Super Bowl, which is a tough road too. I know, you just suddenly you're like, oh, the Bills and Ravens are out of it, and we suddenly don't have to play these teams. It would be tough to I could see the Broncos pulling off an upset. The Chargers go to Baltimore. they figure it out in the divisional round, and then suddenly if you're able to get past Denver, which I believe that Kansas City would get past Denver, and that now you're playing LA at home too. This is going to be a fun tournament. There is going to be an upset or two, and there's going to be a team that really doesn't belong there in the Final Four, in my opinion. And I'm very intrigued by that, because I've always felt that once you get to the Final Four, that championship weekend, anything can really happen. Those teams are good, so we'll see.
Absolutely, and part of me hopes that it is chalk a little bit so that we can get Baltimore and Buffalo in the AFC division round, because that certainly would be highlight football with Lamar Jackson versus Josh Allen. We'll take our final break of the show. When we come back, we'll get to Pete's 3 things to watch and the mailbag questions. Look for Arrowhead Pride's tweet. Look for Pete's tweet. Probably the same thing right there. And you can always use our text line at 913-912-4810. We'll take a quick break. You're listening to Arrowhead Pride Radio on Sports Radio 810 WHB.
Enjoying the show so far? Now it's time to get you involved. Text in your comments or questions to 913-912-4810, and we'll read and talk about it right now.
Back here on Arrowhead Pride Radio on Sports Radio 810 WHB. I'm your host, Jack Johnson. That's Pete Sweeney. Caden Spruill is producing. Kyle Collier back there as well. And want to remind you that we're brought to you by Heartland Financial and Mortgage. Check them out at hfmkc.com. Also want to let you know that we are brought to you by the CW Farm and Ranch, a venue like no other. Well, we're going to get to our 3 things to watch, though. The Chiefs are on the bye. They get to kick their feet up. We were just talking off air about how great this weekend is going to be. Lots of fantastic matchups. Mm-hmm. You believe there's going to be a couple of upsets here, but let's go look ahead to that divisional round matchup because the Chiefs are going to be there, whether teams like it or not. Who is going to start at left tackle in that game? I know we touched on it a little bit between DJ Humphries and Joe Thuney, but whether it be the Chargers, the Broncos, the Texans, the Steelers, whoever it may be of those teams, who's going to be the left tackle in that game?
Yeah, I keep going back and forth on this. I think it has to be Thuney at this point. Maybe Andy Reid changes my mind on Friday when he's expected to speak to the media Thursday or Friday, something like that. I just think you haven't seen enough from Humphries. Is it fair to him? No, I think he got an unfortunate set of cards, right? Like he got back in that game. I believe it was against the Chargers. Was okay in the first half, a little shaky, which was to be expected off injury. I thought he settled in the second half, and then he gets the hamstring injury, and then you don't see him for 3 weeks, and now he's next to Kingsley Suamanta-Ia, and he's supposed to be auditioning for a playoff. You ran out of time.
Yeah.
The sand in the hourglass hit the bottom, and I just don't think you could take the chance of not having what Andy Reid often will refer to as your best 5 guys out there. And right now it's just hard for me to convince myself that that's Humphries.
Now, speaking of best guys out there, Jalen Watson certainly is one of this team's best secondary members. The practice window is now opened up. It's going to be a race to get him activated, to get him healthy, where he can get to a playable level. But what's the status on him right now? Can you expect him to get maybe a little bit of work in the divisional round game? Or do you say, we're going to try to get through this divisional round game so that you can be closer to 100% in an AFC title game to go to the Super Bowl?
So Watson's played in just the one practice, and Andy Reid on Friday, he kept on saying, I just wanted to see how he came out of this practice. So again, I hate to keep kicking the can down the road here, but we'll get official comments on some of this stuff later this week at the end of the week. In those videos, he's looked good, and obviously he didn't suffer any kind of injury in his return to the practice field. The Chiefs usually like to give these guys, especially these longer-term injuries, a week or two of practice. That's why the bye week is so fortunate. I'll tell you right now, if the Chiefs had to play in the wild card round, I do not think he would be suiting up. But they don't. They don't have to play. And so he can do whatever workouts they plan on doing this week as they get ready and stay in shape. And I think if he shows that he's close or reasonably getting there to what would be 100%, I think there's such a need there that you see the Chiefs make that move. As long as the player says he's okay and he communicates with the trainers and the doctors, as Andy Reid likes to reference a lot of times, give him the clearance. I see no reason why he wouldn't return to the field. I caution people because the way that the team had been treating this, they didn't feel like he was going to return. So it might be the AFC title game, but as long as they keep winning, I don't think we've seen the last of Watson this season. He wouldn't just be on the practice field for no reason. So at some point here, you should expect him back. I just wonder when that is.
Now, I think the question on a lot of people's mind out there as they gear up for a fantastic wild card weekend, who is going to be that team that strolls into Arrowhead Stadium next weekend? Because we know they're going to get the lowest remaining seed. Yeah. Is it going to be Denver pulling off the upset in Buffalo? Will it be Pittsburgh pulling off the upset in Baltimore? Mm-hmm. Or will it be the winner of that Texans and Chargers game?
I want to pick Denver so bad on the money line. I do. I believe in them. I think they look really good. I mentioned to you off air, and I'll bring it on air now. The last 2 times Buffalo played a playoff team this year, they gave up 42 points, and Denver's defense is pretty good. Obviously, if you're a bettor, I love the points in that game. I think it is going to be closer than the 8.5 or 9.5 or whatever it is. I just don't have the onions to tell you that I think they're going to win in Buffalo. I just can't do it. So I think I agree with Ron. I think the Chargers is the most logical answer. But quite clearly, you can hear from my voice, I wouldn't be stunned if it's a lower seed, that 6 or 7 that gets in. I mean, Pittsburgh has a division game. They haven't looked great, but it is a division game again in their postseason matchup. And again, I think the Broncos are a dangerous team to anyone, not just the Buffalo Bills, because I'll reiterate, Bo Nix has proven he's a capable quarterback. They have good receivers, good enough line. They have a running back room. Their defense is disruptive as all hell. They can make the opposing quarterback uncomfortable. And there's just like a house money factor with them where, you just don't know. And so I'm very intrigued by that game. Nobody agrees. I tweeted I was intrigued by the game on Sunday during the Chiefs game, and one of the Chiefs fans responded in my mentions and told me to go outside. And it was cold. I wasn't going to go outside. It was snowy. It was disgusting.
Blizzard.
Which was rude, but I'll wear it, and I'll wear egg on my face. Like, if you want to get in my mentions after Buffalo wins 42-10 or whatever it is, that's fine too. I'll take it.
I think one thought that has crossed my mind before we get to a couple mailbag questions here is which team gets tighter if they're trailing in the fourth quarter, Buffalo or Baltimore? Because those two teams feel like the ones with the most pressure on the AFC side because of falling short. But if Pittsburgh's up by, let's say, 7 points to begin the fourth quarter, vice versa, Buffalo is trailing Denver by 7 points going into the fourth quarter. Which team is more anxious? Which fan base is sweating more at that point?
The answer is yes. and like, we never want to look at it this way in Kansas City. The Chiefs really have no pressure either. If the Chiefs lost a division game, it would be incredibly disappointing. If they got to an AFC title game, played their hearts out, and lost that game, they have accomplished a lot. And it wouldn't necessarily mean the end of the dynasty, because the dynasty can span, like we look at the Patriots as a dynasty. That was over 20 years.
A 10-year gap as
Six
well.
championships over 20 years. The dynasty wouldn't necessarily be over. And I think people would still look at the Chiefs as the measuring stick of the entire NFL, even if they didn't make it to the Super Bowl. Now, if they were to get upset in the divisional round, a little bit different. Buffalo and Baltimore are under extreme pressure to win the AFC and win the Super Bowl because they just cannot get over the hump that is the Kansas City Chiefs. The Mahomes is Michael Jordan to Reggie Miller and Patrick Ewing and all those players who weren't able to get it done. He is Tom Brady to Peyton Manning and all those quarterbacks in the AFC that would continue to not get it done. Patrick Mahomes has prevented a lot of these really talented quarterbacks and really great programs from not being able to accomplish what they want to. And the trick here too is I'm saying Baltimore and Buffalo have the most pressure. One of them or both is going to be in this situation where it's just extreme and incredible disappointment. It's a major storyline for me in the playoffs, and I think the answer is both. You can't answer that question because I think they're under extreme pressure, and you can make the same exact case for both franchises. Yeah.
All right, want to get to the final three mailbag questions here before we wrap up our show. Got about 4 minutes here, so not quite rapid fire, but quicker answers.
Sure.
Question number 1. Should they bring in another kicker?
No, I don't think they should. I know that there is that temptation of like, well, Butker's not automatic. But even a Butker that is not necessarily automatic is still one of the best kickers in the NFL. And so while it's been like it almost is like you don't know what you have until it's gone. Yeah, like it was really nice where he was like 99%. It doesn't seem like that's the case right now, but 95 is pretty good. And it still to me is a case where you got to roll with Butker. Like I said, I don't love like what I'm seeing where he's falling over every kick. They seem to think that that's the way he wants to do it. So whatever. You just hope that he rights the ship by the time the playoffs roll around here.
Question number 2, is anyone else worried about a 24-day layoff for these guys? I can't imagine they would come out firing on all cylinders. Starters should have played the first half against Denver.
Yeah, respectfully, I disagree. I like the question because I look at it and I know that you could say you can't look at it this way. Like, we don't say that in the first game. We don't say the Chiefs haven't played in 6 months worth of time. They're going to come out flat. I know the other team is in the same boat, so it's not the exact same thing. We say it's a huge advantage for Kansas City because Andy Reid is so good when he has extra time to prepare. Yeah. And this week, the reason, we talked about the Jets job before. The reason Matt Nagy's probably doing this virtually is because this team has split up the 4 options and is like, let's get a jump on all 4 teams. And they take having the extra time really seriously. And I just think about all the bumps and bruises. Like, not every injury necessarily makes the injury report. It could be a guy just going through some kind of nagging sore thing where he doesn't necessarily need treatment. You take all those guys out of the mix, they're going to be training camp week 1. 3 weeks is no joke. Training camp week 1 fresh, for this game, whatever it is. And I just think when you're the best team in the NFL, you have 15 wins, most wins in franchise history. I think that plays into an advantage more than it does a disadvantage. I get the fear, I get the question, but yeah, no, I'm not worried about that aspect of it. No.
And lastly, a two-parter here: will Steven Nelson be active for the postseason? And number 2, will Bengals fans and media just accept that they will never be what the Chiefs have become?
If you're looked at in a certain light in Kansas City, just leave and then come back, and then you're going to be a hero. Like, no one liked Steve Nelson before he just suddenly came back. And no, I mean, I can only go by the way that Steve Spagnuolo has addressed Steve Nelson questions to us. And very clearly, a couple of weeks ago when they did media on Sunday, I mean, he essentially said he's emergency depth. Now, do you want to make the case that this is an emergency? All right. I mean, I think the Chiefs, the way that they're viewing it is they've had Joshua Williams and Chris Rowland-Wallace and guys like Keith Taylor in the building since Jump Street. And until those guys are unavailable, they're going to run through them first in these rotational spots. I also think that Jalen Watson adds to that mix. So I don't think so. They didn't even activate him for this game, and they could have used a practice squad call-up. They didn't do it. So, unfortunately, I don't. For those that are wanting Nelson, I don't think so. No.
All right, great stuff as always from Pete. That'll do it for another edition of Arrowhead Pride Radio on Sports Radio 810 WHB. I've been your host, Jack Johnson. Again, that's Pete Sweeney. A big thank you to Caden Spruill and Kyle Collier producing this thing behind the scenes.
Yeah, thank you for joining us on the Arrowhead Pride Radio show, brought to you by Heartland Financial and Mortgage, putting people first. Check them out at hfmkc.com.
Fantastic wild card weekend. It's going to be all day Saturday, all day Sunday, and it will bleed into Monday. We'll know who the Chiefs' opponent is on Sunday afternoon. We'll have a breakdown of it next week. Thank you for listening, and you take it easy, Kansas City.